What if the real reason you feel drained is not because life is too hard, but because you keep giving your mind to people who do not deserve a place in it? Think about that for a second. How much of your peace has been stolen by someone's opinion, someone's attitude, someone's disrespect, someone's need to provoke you? Not because they were powerful, but because they knew how to pull your attention away from yourself. And once your attention is gone, your peace goes with it. This is where Stoicism becomes more than philosophy. It becomes protection. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus all taught in different ways that your strength begins the moment you stop letting the outside world command your inner world. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every conflict deserves your energy. Not every person deserves access to your emotions. And that is not coldness. That is self-control. That is mental strength. That is emotional discipline. Because the truth is, ignoring people is not about pride. It is not about acting superior. It is about learning the art of keeping your mind clear. It is about refusing to let toxic people, petty drama, manipulation, negativity, and constant noise decide the quality of your day. The Stoic mindset teaches you to stay calm, protect your focus, and choose your response instead of living in reaction mode. And maybe that is the real secret. Maybe peace does not come from making people understand you. Maybe peace comes from understanding that not everyone needs your reaction. Some people only have power as long as they can disturb you. The moment they can no longer reach your inner state, something shifts. You become harder to control, harder to shake, harder to pull into chaos. So in this episode, we are going to talk about the power of ignoring people, the deeper Stoic secret to mental strength, self-control, inner peace, and emotional freedom. Not in a cold way, and not in a way that disconnects you from life, but in a way that helps you protect your energy, your mind, and your purpose. If this message finds you at the right moment, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. Number 1. The key to living a peaceful and purposeful life isn't about seeking approval from the world, but aligning yourself with your own values. One of the quietest ways a person loses themselves is by getting too used to watching other people's faces. You say something, then you check how it landed. You make a choice, then you wonder who agrees with it. You set a boundary, then part of you feels guilty just because somebody looked disappointed. And little by little, without even noticing it, your life stops being guided by your own compass and starts being guided by reactions. Not truth, not conviction, not peace, just reaction. That is exhausting, because no matter how careful you are, no matter how kind you try to be, no matter how much you explain yourself, the world will never respond in one clean, stable, fair way. Some people will respect you when you are available, then resent you when you are not. Some will praise your softness, but only because it makes you easier to use. Some will call you selfish the moment you stop abandoning yourself for their comfort. So if your peace depends on approval, then your peace is always one opinion away from collapsing. This is exactly why Stoicism matters here. Marcus Aurelius kept reminding himself that the mind can choose how it sees things. Epictetus taught that the real work is to focus on what is in your control. Seneca warned again and again about the danger of becoming too dependent on the crowd. And when you bring all of that together, the lesson becomes very simple, very human, and very practical. The more your identity depends on what people think of you, the easier it is to disturb you. But the more your life is anchored in your own values, the harder it becomes for the outside world to pull you out of yourself. That is where peace starts to feel real. Not when everybody understands you, not when nobody criticizes you, not when you finally win universal approval. Peace begins when you become honest enough to ask yourself, what do I actually stand for? Not what looks good, not what gets applause, not what avoids conflict. What truly matters to you? Maybe it is self-respect. Maybe it is honesty. Maybe it is discipline. Maybe it is calm. Maybe it is dignity. Maybe it is the decision to stop betraying your own needs just to be accepted. Once that becomes clear, something changes inside you. You stop over-explaining every decision to people who were never going to understand it anyway. You stop panicking when someone misreads your silence. You stop feeling responsible for managing every emotion other people have in response to your growth. You begin to realize that a meaningful life is not built by staying emotionally available to every opinion. It is built by staying loyal to what you know is right, even when that loyalty is inconvenient. And this is where the power of ignoring begins at a deeper level, because when your values are clear, ignoring people no longer feels like a game, an ego move, or some cold performance. It becomes a natural act of inner order. You're not ignoring them because you think you are above them. You are ignoring what pulls you away from your center. You are ignoring what tempts you to betray your principles. You are ignoring the noise that tries to make you forget who you are. That kind of strength looks quiet from the outside, but inside, it is everything. It means you can let somebody misunderstand you without running after them for correction. It means you can hear criticism without instantly shrinking. It means you can walk your path without needing the crowd to bless every step. It means your life begins to belong to you again. And maybe that is the point. A peaceful and purposeful life was never going to come from being approved by everyone around you. It was always going to come from becoming so clear about your values that the world's noise loses its authority over your mind. Because once you know who you are, not every voice gets to tell you otherwise. Number 2, this isn't just about ignoring someone's insults or avoiding petty drama. It's about training yourself to be unaffected by the world around you. At first, this idea can sound a little unrealistic, maybe even impossible, because how are you supposed to be unaffected by the world when the world keeps pressing on you from every direction? People speak carelessly. Some provoke on purpose. Some test your limits just to see if they still have access to your emotions. Then there is the noise that does not come from one person at all. The pressure, the comparison, the constant feeling that you're being watched, judged, measured, or quietly pushed out of your own peace. So when we talk about ignoring people, it has to mean something deeper than simply pretending not to hear an insult or walking away from obvious drama. That is only the surface. The deeper work is learning how not to let external things settle inside you and start governing your inner state. That is the real training, because anyone can stay calm for a moment and still carry the poison for hours. Anyone can say nothing out loud while replaying the entire scene all night in their head. Anyone can avoid the argument but still lose their peace internally. Stoicism asks for something more honest than performance. It asks whether the thing actually entered you. Whether it changed your breathing, your focus, your mood, your sense of self. Whether a stranger's behavior was allowed to become your inner atmosphere. That is where the battle really is. Epictetus said that people are disturbed not by things, but by the view they take of them. And that line matters here because it places the real source of suffering in a place most people avoid looking. It's not always the event itself. It is what your mind does with it. A look becomes rejection. A criticism becomes humiliation. Being ignored becomes proof that you are unimportant. Someone else's coldness becomes a wound you keep reopening. The outside event happens once, but the mind repeats it, enlarges it, personalizes it, and then lives inside it as if it were permanent. This is why mental strength is not just about enduring hard moments. It is about interrupting that process before it takes over your inner life. Think about how much energy gets wasted every day on things that should have ended in seconds. A comment, a delay, a rude tone, a passive-aggressive message, a subtle act of disrespect. These moments become heavy, not because they're always important, but because the mind keeps inviting them back in. And once that becomes a habit, you are no longer living from your center. You are living at the mercy of whatever happens around you. That kind of life feels unstable because it is unstable. Your peace keeps changing shape depending on who touched it last. Marcus Aurelius tried to remind himself of this constantly. He knew the world would be filled with difficult people, selfish people, careless people, arrogant people, but his deeper lesson was not simply expect bad behavior. It was, do not let bad behavior turn you into a hostage. That is the part people miss. Stoicism is not passive tolerance, it is inner sovereignty. It is the refusal to let the world rent space in your mind without permission. And this kind of self-mastery is built quietly through repeated moments of awareness. You begin noticing when something has entered you too deeply. You catch yourself building imaginary arguments in your head. You feel the temptation to prove, defend, explain, or emotionally chase. Then, instead of feeding that impulse, you pause, you breathe, you step back, you ask, does this deserve space in me? Not, was this unfair? It may have been unfair. Not, was that disrespectful? It may have been disrespectful. The better question is whether it deserves to become part of your inner life. That question changes everything, because once you start living that way, ignoring is no longer a tactic. It becomes discernment. You stop treating every emotional disturbance as something sacred that must be processed endlessly. You begin to see that some things are only powerful because you keep honoring them with attention, and the less available you become to external noise, the more stable your inner world becomes. You still notice things. You still see clearly. You still understand what is happening around you, but you stop absorbing every impact as if it were a command. That is what it means to be unaffected by the world around you, not numb, not detached in some dead way, just rooted, calm enough to stay yourself in the presence of chaos, strong enough to let small minds remain small without shrinking your day to their size, free enough to choose your state instead of receiving it from other people. Because the moment the world can no longer easily enter your mind, your life begins to feel like it belongs to you again. Number 3. When you consistently give toxic people your attention, you reinforce their belief that they matter. There is something a lot of people never fully realize until much later. Attention is never neutral. It is not just something you give for a second and then take back untouched. Attention is energy. Attention is permission. Attention is a kind of silent confirmation that says, you have reached me, you have entered my mind, you now have influence here. And this is exactly why toxic people fight so hard for it, even when they pretend not to care. Because for many of them, attention is power. That is why some people keep provoking, keep pushing, keep making little comments, keep creating tension where there was no need for tension at all. It is not always because they want resolution. A lot of the time, they want impact. They want to know they can still move something inside you. They want to feel that their words still have weight, that their presence still has control, that your peace is still fragile enough to respond to them. And the more consistently you give them that response, whether through anger, explanation, frustration, or emotional overthinking, the more you teach them that they still matter in ways they should not. This is one of the hardest truths to accept, especially if you are someone with a good heart, because part of you wants to believe that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, respond wisely enough, stay patient enough, maybe the pattern will stop. Maybe they will understand, maybe they will finally become reasonable, but toxic dynamics are rarely fed by clarity alone. They are fed by access. They survive because the other person keeps finding a way into your emotional space, and once they know they can still get in, they usually keep trying the same door. Seneca understood something important here. He often wrote about protecting the mind from useless disturbance, not because the world would stop being unreasonable, but because your peace is too valuable to keep placing in careless hands. Some people do not grow calmer when you give them more attention. They grow bolder. They read your repeated engagement as evidence that they still occupy space in your life. Even your frustration can flatter them because it tells them they still have the power to interrupt your inner balance. That is why constant reaction becomes dangerous, not only because it drains you, but because it teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches the other person that they are still emotionally relevant every time they want to be. It tells them your silence can be broken, your focus can be shaken, your state can be altered on command. And even if they never say it directly, they feel it. They sense it. That is why some people only lose interest when they stop getting emotional proof that they can still reach you. This is not about manipulation. It is about reality. What you reward tends to repeat. What you energize tends to expand. And what you repeatedly answer begins to believe it deserves an answer. So part of Stoic self-control is learning to stop feeding patterns that injure you. Marcus Aurelius did not teach people to live at the mercy of every irritating person they met. He taught return to the self, return to reason, return to inner command, and sometimes that return looks very simple from the outside. No long explanation, no emotional performance, no attempt to win the last word, just restraint, just quiet. Just the decision not to keep watering something that should have dried up a long time ago. And yes, this can feel uncomfortable in the beginning, because when you stop giving toxic people your attention, you stop playing the role they assigned to you. You stop being the responder, the fixer, the defender, the one who can be pulled back in with one look, one message, one careless tone. You become less available to the cycle, and whenever a cycle is broken, there is often a moment of resistance. They may try harder, they may act more offended, they may push more than usual, but that does not mean you are doing something wrong. A lot of the time, it means the old access is starting to disappear. That is where your strength has to deepen, because real freedom begins when you understand that not every person who reaches for your attention deserves to receive it. Not every voice deserves a seat at your table. Not every provocation deserves your nervous system. And not every toxic presence deserves evidence that they still matter to your inner world. The less you feed what harms your peace, the weaker it becomes. And one day, almost quietly, you notice something has changed. The people who once disturbed you no longer feel powerful. The patterns that once pulled you in no longer feel magnetic. The need to answer, prove, or react starts fading. Not because they became better, but because you stopped confirming their importance with your energy. That is when ignoring becomes more than silence. It becomes self-respect. Number 4. The moment you stop responding, the moment you refuse to be drawn into their drama, their power over you starts to fade. One of the strangest things you learn in life is that some people do not feel powerful because they are wise, calm, or deeply grounded. They feel powerful because they know how to get a reaction. That is all. They know which tone unsettles you, which words make you explain yourself, which behaviors pull you into defending, proving, clarifying, or emotionally chasing closure. And for a while, this can make them seem bigger than they really are. Not because they're truly strong, but because your reaction keeps giving them a kind of borrowed strength. That borrowed strength disappears the moment you stop supplying it. And this is where many people get confused, because they think power is lost in one dramatic decision, one final confrontation, one perfectly worded speech. But often it fades in a much quieter way. It fades when you do not answer the bait. It fades when you stop trying to correct every false impression. It fades when you refuse to turn every provocation into a full emotional event. It fades when your nervous system no longer rises every time their name appears, every time their voice changes, every time their mood tries to enter your day. The less you respond, the less material they have to work with. The less emotional access they get, the weaker their influence becomes. This is why Stoicism is so practical here. Epictetus kept returning to the same truth in different forms. If something outside you can constantly dictate your state, then your freedom is still incomplete. Not because the world must be pleasant before you can be calm, but because inner freedom means other people do not get to operate your mind from a distance. And the first sign of that freedom is often restraint, not dramatic restraint, quiet restraint. The kind that says, I see what this is, and I'm not stepping into it. That changes everything, because drama survives through participation. It needs response, tension, emotional heat, repeated explanation, inner replay. Without that, it starts collapsing under its own emptiness. A manipulative comment lands differently when it is not followed by panic. A guilt-driven message loses force when it is not rewarded with instant self-abandonment. A person who is used to controlling the emotional tone of your day becomes far less powerful when your state no longer changes every time they try. Seneca warned against handing the mind over to disturbance, and that warning becomes very real in situations like this. The issue is not only what someone does. The issue is what you allow it to keep doing inside you. A person can provoke once. That is theirs. But if your mind keeps continuing the scene for hours, building arguments, imagining replies, reopening the wound, then the drama has already moved in. Your silence outside means very little if the chaos is still fully alive inside. So the real work is deeper than simply not answering. It is learning to withdraw participation at every level. You stop answering with your mouth, yes, but you also begin to stop answering with your mind. You stop building your day around their behavior. You stop letting their instability decide your focus. You stop treating every emotional disturbance like an emergency that must be managed right now. And little by little, what once felt heavy begins to feel smaller. Not because the other person transformed, but because the connection between their behavior and your inner state is breaking. That is when their power starts to fade. At first, this can feel unnatural. Part of you may still want to step in, explain, defend, or restore the old emotional rhythm. There is often discomfort when you stop playing a role you have played for a long time. But discomfort is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it is the feeling of an unhealthy pattern losing its grip. Sometimes it is the nervous system learning a new truth, that peace is allowed, that non-participation is allowed, that not every emotional invitation must be accepted. Marcus Aurelius understood that dignity often looks like simplicity, no performance, no obsession with being seen as right, no need to wrestle with every difficult person until the universe declares you the winner. Just a steady return to reason, to proportion, to self-command. That is the deeper strength here. You are not trying to destroy the other person. You are simply refusing to keep empowering what disturbs your peace. And once you live this way, something beautiful begins to happen. Situations that once consumed you start passing through without taking over. People who once knew exactly how to shake you no longer find the same access point. Their words may still exist, their behavior may still be what it is, but it no longer enters you the same way. The door is not as open as it used to be. That is real power. Not winning every argument, not controlling every person, not forcing respect from those who do not know how to give it. Real power is when someone tries to pull you into disorder and finds there is nothing in you willing to leave its center. Because the moment you stop responding to every pull, every bait, every little drama, you stop lending your life to people who only felt strong when you were shaken. Number 5. The practice of ignoring is in essence a tool for mental freedom. A lot of people hear the word ignoring and immediately think of distance, silence, or withdrawal, as if it is only a social move you use with difficult people. But at a deeper level, ignoring is not really about people first. It is about freedom, mental freedom. the kind that begins the moment you realize you do not have to engage with everything that tries to enter your mind. You do not have to wrestle with every opinion. You do not have to answer every provocation. You do not have to emotionally process every careless word as if it carries truth. And you definitely do not have to keep handing your attention to whatever disturbs you most. That realization changes something inside you, because without it, the mind becomes too available, too open, too easy to reach. A comment ruins your mood. A delay changes your whole day. Someone's bad energy enters the room, and now it is somehow living in your chest. One moment of disrespect follows you for hours. One passive-aggressive message keeps replaying while you are trying to work, rest, or even enjoy something beautiful. That is how people lose their inner freedom. Not always through dramatic suffering, but through constant small captures of attention. And the strange part is that many of those captures feel normal at first. They feel justified. Of course you're thinking about it. Of course it bothered you. Of course you want to understand why they said that, why they acted like that, why they changed, why they became cold, why they tried to provoke you. But the Stoic lesson is not that these things never sting. The lesson is that your first emotional reaction does not need to become your permanent mental residence. That is where freedom begins. Epictetus understood this deeply. He kept guiding attention back to one central truth. What matters most is not what is happening around you, but what authority it has been given within you. That is the heart of mental freedom. Not pretending nothing affects you, but becoming wise enough to decide what gets to stay. Just because something knocks on the door of your mind does not mean it deserves to come in and rearrange the furniture. And when you really start living that way, ignoring stops feeling rude or defensive. It starts feeling clean. It feels like protecting the conditions under which clarity can exist. Because the truth is, a distracted mind is rarely a free mind. A mind that keeps circling around other people's behavior, motives, opinions, and emotional storms is a mind that has lost contact with its own direction. It becomes reactive instead of intentional. It becomes occupied instead of available for what actually matters. That is why ignoring is so powerful. It creates space. Space to think clearly, space to hear your own judgment, space to choose your next step without interference from noise, space to stay connected to your values instead of being dragged around by every external disturbance. And that space is not a luxury, it is necessary. Without it, your life becomes crowded by things that do not deserve that level of importance. Seneca often wrote about guarding the mind against useless agitation, and there is something deeply compassionate in that idea, because a peaceful mind does not happen by accident. It is built through repeated acts of refusal, refusing to chase every explanation, refusing to relive every insult, refusing to internalize every projection, refusing to let every emotional spark become a fire. This does not make you detached from life. It makes you available for the right parts of life. You become more present, not less, more stable, not colder, more focused, not numb. Because when your energy is no longer leaking into every pointless disturbance, you suddenly have more of yourself, more calm, more thoughtfulness, more patience, more discipline, more room to work on your own growth instead of being mentally tied to the behavior of people who are still at war with themselves. And maybe that is the quiet beauty of this practice. Ignoring is not empty. It gives something back to you. Every unnecessary thing you stop feeding returns a little energy to your own life. Every battle you refuse that never deserved your spirit in the first place makes you lighter. Every time you choose not to carry what should have ended already, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. So yes, the practice of ignoring may look simple from the outside, but inside it is one of the most powerful forms of liberation. Because the person who no longer feels obligated to engage with every disturbance is no longer easy to control. And that is what mental freedom really is. Not the absence of noise, but the ability to remain inwardly unowned by it. Number 6. When you stop giving away your attention to everything that disturbs you, you take back your ability to shape your own thoughts, your own reality. There is a quiet truth that changes everything once you really feel it, not just understand it in theory. Your attention is building your life every day. Whatever keeps getting your mental energy starts becoming your inner world. Whatever you keep revisiting starts shaping your mood, your focus, your decisions, even the way you see yourself. So when your attention is constantly being pulled toward irritation, disrespect, noise, comparison, negativity, and emotional disturbance, it is not just stealing a few moments from you. It is slowly helping create the reality you live in from the inside. That is why this matters so much. Because a lot of people think reality is only made of external events. What happened, what was said, what went wrong, who disappointed them, who ignored them, who judged them. But your lived reality is not just what happens around you. It is also what your mind keeps magnifying. It is what your thoughts keep circling. It is what your nervous system keeps preparing for. Two people can go through similar situations and live in completely different inner worlds, simply because one person keeps surrendering their attention to what disturbs them, while the other learns how to return it to what is true, useful, and under their control. Epictetus kept bringing people back to this point in one form or another. He knew that once attention becomes enslaved to the outside world, the self starts losing its authority. And that is what happens when you react to everything. You no longer direct your mind. Your mind gets directed by whatever is loudest, most irritating, most provocative, or most emotionally charged. That is not just distraction, that is a loss of inner government. And maybe you have felt that before. You wake up with good intentions, but one message changes your mood. One person's attitude follows you for hours. One memory reopens something old. One moment of disrespect keeps replaying while you are trying to work, rest, or just breathe. The day keeps moving, but your mind is stuck somewhere else, feeding something that does not deserve that kind of power. And the sad part is not only that it drains you. The sad part is that it takes your creative force away from your own life. Energy that could have gone into building, healing, focusing, improving, or simply being present gets spent managing disturbances that never deserved that level of intimacy. Marcus Aurelius understood this in a very practical way. He kept reminding himself to return to his own ruling mind, not because the world would stop being chaotic, but because the mind that belongs to everyone else eventually belongs to no one. If every opinion can enter you, if every irritation can shape your state, if every outside disturbance can decide what kind of day you are going to have, then your life is constantly being edited by forces that do not care about your peace. That is why ignoring is not passive, it is creative. It allows you to shape the atmosphere of your own mind again. Because once you stop handing your attention to everything that disturbs you, you begin to notice what was waiting underneath all that noise. Clarity, direction, better judgment, a calmer emotional rhythm, a stronger connection to your own thoughts. You begin to hear yourself again, and when that happens, life starts feeling less like something that keeps happening to you, and more like something you are consciously participating in. This is what it means to take back your reality. Not in some magical or exaggerated sense, but in the deepest practical sense. You stop letting the worst thing around you become the main thing within you. You stop building your inner life around external disorder. You stop allowing other people's confusion to become your mental climate. And from that place, your choices become cleaner, your reactions become slower, your focus becomes sharper, your world begins to reflect more of your intention and less of your irritation. Seneca would probably say this is one of the great forms of self-protection, not the protection of your image, but the protection of your consciousness. Because once your attention is scattered, your life feels scattered. Once your attention is reclaimed, your strength returns with it. And this does not mean you deny reality. It means you stop worshipping what disturbs you. You stop treating every annoyance as if it deserves your full mental presence. You begin asking a better question. Is this shaping me in the direction I want to go? If the answer is no, then maybe it does not deserve another hour of thought. Maybe it does not deserve another replay. Maybe it does not deserve one more seat inside your mind. That is the turning point. The moment you realize your attention is not a small thing. It is your power. It is your authorship. It is the invisible force that keeps writing your inner life. And when you stop giving that force away so easily, you do not just feel calmer. You become more deliberate, more grounded, more difficult to disturb, because now your mind is no longer open to everything. Now it belongs to you again. Number 7. When you stop giving people the emotional reaction they want, they are left with nothing. There are people who do not really want your honesty, your peace, or your understanding. What they want is your reaction. They want the shift in your face, the change in your tone, the long message, the defensive explanation, the visible frustration, the proof that they still know how to touch a nerve inside you. And once you see that clearly, a lot of confusing behavior starts making sense. Some conversations were never about resolution. Some comments were never about truth. Some provocations were never about the actual issue. They were about access. They were about control. They were about getting inside your emotional space and leaving evidence that they can still move you. That is why your reaction becomes so valuable. Not because you are weak, but because emotion is a kind of confirmation. The moment you react exactly how someone hoped you would, you give them information. You show them where the door is. You show them what still hurts, what still unsettles you, what still makes you abandon your center. And for a manipulative person, that is often enough. They do not need to win fairly if they can simply get you emotionally off balance. They do not need depth if they can still trigger movement. They do not need truth if they can still get impact. This is why Stoicism places such a deep emphasis on self-command. Epictetus did not teach emotional slavery with better manners. He taught inner freedom. Marcus Aurelius did not remind himself to stay calm because calm looks elegant. He did it because a person who cannot govern their internal response is too easy for the world to steer. And Seneca understood that many forms of conflict survive not because they are strong in themselves, but because we keep feeding them with our agitation. That is the heart of this point. Some people only have power while your emotions are available to them. The moment you stop providing that emotional fuel, the entire dynamic begins to change. Suddenly they are speaking, but nothing lands the same way. They are reaching, but there is no grip. They are trying to pull something out of you, but there is no immediate opening, no quick collapse, no dramatic payoff. And for someone who was relying on emotional access, that feels like emptiness. Because once the reaction disappears, what they were really standing on starts to disappear too. This does not mean you become robotic. It does not mean you feel nothing. It means you stop turning every internal feeling into external evidence. That distinction matters. You may still notice the disrespect. You may still feel the attempt. You may still understand exactly what is happening, but you do not hand it back to them as a performance. You do not confirm their reach by showing them the wound they were hoping to touch. And that kind of restraint is powerful precisely because it is quiet. A lot of people think strength means saying the perfect line in the perfect moment. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes strength is the look that does not break. the silence that does not rush to fill itself, the refusal to explain when explanation is only being extracted to keep the drama alive, the decision to remain inwardly composed while someone is trying very hard to make you emotionally available to their chaos. That is when the whole game changes, because emotional reactions are often the reward. Anger can be a reward, defensiveness can be a reward, desperation can be a reward. Even sadness, if it is visible enough, can become a reward for someone who wants to know they still affect you. But when the reward is gone, the pattern begins to starve. What once felt effective no longer works the same way. What once created immediate movement now meets stillness. And stillness in these moments is not emptiness. It is self-possession. Think about how many situations in life kept going only because both sides kept feeding them. A person throws something sharp, the other person reacts. That reaction creates more material. Then comes another reaction, another explanation, another attempt to correct, defend, clarify, or emotionally settle the score. And before long, the entire thing is alive, growing, feeding on attention. But remove one thing, the emotional supply, and suddenly the cycle begins to weaken, not always instantly, not always neatly, but undeniably. Marcus Aurelius would probably tell you that your mind becomes stronger every time it refuses to become a stage for someone else's disorder. And that is exactly what this is. You are no longer offering your nervous system as proof of their importance. You are no longer making your peace negotiable just because someone wants access to it. You are no longer allowing another person's immaturity, manipulation, envy, bitterness, or emotional hunger to decide the rhythm of your inner world. That is real self-control. And yes, in the beginning, this can feel strange. When you are used to reacting, silence can feel unnatural. When you are used to defending yourself, composure can feel like passivity. When you are used to proving your heart, your intentions, your truth, saying less can feel almost uncomfortable. But a lot of that discomfort comes from breaking an old habit, not from doing something wrong. You are learning not to give people instant emotional access just because they demand it. You are learning that your feelings do not owe themselves to every situation. You are learning that not every pull deserves movement. And once that lesson settles, something inside you becomes much harder to shake. You begin to notice that the people who once depended on your reaction start losing their effect. Their methods seem smaller, their words feel thinner, their efforts look more obvious. Not because they changed, but because you are finally seeing the mechanism without stepping into it. You are no longer hypnotized by the surface. You can feel the attempt without becoming the response. That is the deeper freedom here. When you stop giving people the emotional reaction they want, you do not just frustrate manipulation. You reclaim authority. You send a message, even without words, that your inner life is no longer public property, that your peace is not available on demand, that your state cannot be pulled around by every careless person who wants to test your limits. And when that becomes real in you, many people are left with nothing, because the only thing they ever had was your reaction. Number 8. The true power of ignoring comes when you master it not just with others, but within yourself. At a certain point you realize the hardest person to ignore is not the rude one, the manipulative one, or the negative one standing in front of you. It is the voice that stays behind after they are gone. The replay, the mental argument, the imaginary scene where you finally say the perfect thing, the private wound that keeps asking for one more explanation, one more review, one more moment of emotional attention. And this is where the deeper Stoic work begins. Because ignoring other people can protect your peace for a moment, but learning to ignore the chaos that keeps echoing inside you is what truly changes your life. This is the part nobody sees. From the outside, you may look calm. You did not answer. You did not react. You walked away. You kept your dignity. but inside, the whole thing may still be alive. Their words are still moving through your head. Their disrespect is still sitting in your chest. Their tone is still being replayed, as if your mind is trying to solve something that cannot be solved through repetition. And that is where many people lose the peace they thought they had protected. They escaped the outer conflict, but they carried the inner version home with them. That is why the true power of ignoring has to go further than silence. It has to become an inner discipline. The discipline of noticing when your own mind is continuing a drama that already ended. The discipline of catching that old reflex that wants to keep feeding pain with attention. The discipline of realizing that not every thought deserves conversation, and not every emotion deserves an endless seat at the center of your day. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to fight every thought, but to stop bowing to each one as if it were important. Epictetus would understand this immediately. He knew that freedom is not just freedom from difficult people. It is freedom from becoming ruled by the impressions they leave behind. Because sometimes the real captor is no longer outside you. Sometimes it is the judgment inside you that keeps saying, "This should not have happened. I should have said more. I should have defended myself better. I should not have let that affect me." And now the mind is not only carrying the moment, it is also attacking itself for still carrying it. That creates a second layer of suffering. First, the event happens, then the mind refuses to release it. Then shame appears because you are still thinking about it. Then frustration appears because you thought you were stronger than this. Then the inner dialogue becomes louder than the original event ever was. This is why inner mastery matters so much. If you do not learn how to ignore certain thoughts, certain impulses, certain emotional loops, you can remove yourself from toxic people and still remain emotionally tied to them in private. Marcus Aurelius spoke often about returning to the ruling mind, and this is one of the places where that lesson becomes painfully practical. Your mind has to learn how to return home, not once, but repeatedly. Not in a dramatic spiritual way, but in the small, ordinary moments when you notice you are mentally feeding something that is draining your life. You notice the replay beginning again. You notice the old anger asking for more fuel. You notice the inner voice building another speech for an audience that is not even there. And gently, firmly, you pull your attention back. Not because nothing happened, not because it did not hurt, but because your inner world cannot stay forever occupied by what already passed. That is the hidden side of self-control. It is not always visible restraint. Sometimes it is private refusal. Refusal to keep reopening the same wound. Refusal to let one person's behavior become the main climate inside your mind. Refusal to keep granting emotional importance to something that is already over in the outer world. Seneca might say this is one of the highest forms of self-protection, because you are no longer only guarding the gates of your life from other people, you are guarding the gates of your consciousness from unnecessary suffering. And that changes everything. Because when you learn to ignore the destructive voice within, the part of you that keeps reliving, exaggerating, personalizing and deepening every disturbance, you become harder to imprison from the inside. You stop being dragged around by every thought that arrives with urgency. You stop assuming that every emotional wave carries truth. You begin to see that peace is not only about who you let around you, it is also about which inner patterns you keep entertaining. That is when ignoring becomes complete. Not when you silence the world alone, but when you also stop letting your own mind turn every disturbance into a home. Because the deepest freedom begins when even inside yourself, you no longer give everything permission to stay. Number 9. Real strength comes from the ability to control your internal dialogue. A lot of people think strength is something you show in public. The calm face, The firm voice, the ability to stay composed when life gets difficult, and yes, that is part of it. But the deeper kind of strength, the kind that really decides the quality of your life, is much quieter than that. It happens in private. It happens in the conversation you have with yourself after something painful, unfair, embarrassing, disappointing, or confusing takes place. Because long before the world defeats a person, their inner dialogue usually does. That is where everything either breaks or becomes stronger. You can survive a hard moment and still be destroyed by the way you speak to yourself afterward. One rejection becomes, "I am not enough." One mistake becomes, "I always ruin everything." One cold response becomes, "I must not matter." One delay becomes, "Nothing ever works for me." And the mind says these things so quickly, so automatically, that they begin to feel like truth. But they are not truth. They are interpretations, often shaped by fear, old wounds, insecurity, exhaustion, and habit. And if you do not learn how to govern that inner voice, you can look calm on the outside, while your mind quietly turns against you on the inside. That is why this matters so much. Because the voice within does not only describe your life, it shapes it. It influences your courage, your mood, your confidence, your patience, your ability to recover, your willingness to keep going. If your internal dialogue is always harsh, dramatic, hopeless, reactive, or self-punishing, then even ordinary struggles start feeling heavier than they need to feel. Not because life is always unbearable, but because your own mind is adding weight to every experience. Epictetus understood this in a profound way. He kept reminding people that the real problem is often not the event itself, but the judgment attached to it. That teaching becomes very personal when you begin watching the way you talk to yourself. Because many times the outside event passes, but the inner commentary keeps going. It keeps labeling, exaggerating, predicting, condemning. It keeps saying, "This is terrible. This means something is wrong with me. This proves I am failing. This is never going to change." And before long, the suffering is no longer coming mainly from the world. It is coming from the unchecked voice interpreting the world. This is where real self-control begins. Not in suppressing emotion and not in pretending you never feel hurt, but in learning how to interrupt that destructive inner language before it becomes your reality. Marcus Aurelius did this constantly. He brought himself back again and again. Not because he had no difficult thoughts, but because he knew the mind must be trained. It must be corrected. It must be returned to proportion. Otherwise, it wanders into drama, bitterness, fear, self-pity, and mental chaos. And maybe you know that feeling. Something small happens, but inside, the reaction becomes much bigger. The mind starts building a whole story around one moment. One comment turns into a full narrative about your worth. One awkward silence becomes proof of rejection. One hard day becomes evidence that your whole life is off course. That is not reality speaking. That is untrained inner dialogue taking control of the room. The Stoic path does not ask you to become emotionless. It asks you to become aware, to hear the voice and question it, to notice when it is lying, dramatizing, or speaking from panic instead of reason. To ask, is this true? Or is this just fear talking? Is this useful, or is this making me weaker? Would I speak this way to someone I love? Because if the answer is no, then maybe it should not be the voice governing your own life either. And this is where strength becomes deeply human. Sometimes controlling your internal dialogue is as simple as refusing to let one bad moment define the whole day. Sometimes it means replacing "I cannot handle this" with "I'm uncomfortable, but I can stay steady." Sometimes it means not letting your mind turn pain into identity, not letting disappointment turn into self-hatred, not letting confusion become a verdict on your future. It means learning how to speak to yourself in a way that keeps you standing. Seneca knew that the mind can become either a shelter or a tormentor. That choice matters more than most people realize, because wherever you go, your inner voice goes with you, into your work, into your relationships, into your solitude, into your healing, into every challenge you face. And if that voice is always feeding fear, shame, resentment, and exhaustion, then even success will feel fragile. But if that voice becomes steadier, cleaner, wiser, more disciplined, then life begins to feel different from the inside out. That is real power, not because you never struggle, but because your mind no longer turns every struggle into a deeper wound. Not because you never feel pain, but because pain is no longer allowed to start writing false stories about who you are. Not because life becomes silent, but because your inner world becomes guided by something stronger than noise. And once that happens, you stop being such an easy target for the world. Because a person who can govern their internal dialogue is much harder to break, much harder to manipulate, much harder to pull into despair. They still feel, still care, still live fully, but inside there is order. Inside there is a voice that knows how to return to truth. And that voice, more than anything the world says about you, becomes the one that shapes your life. Number 10. When you learn to ignore the distractions, the noise, and the negativity, you create the space to focus on what matters. One of the hardest things to notice at first is that life is not only damaged by big problems, sometimes it is slowly weakened by constant interruption. A little noise here, a little negativity there, one pointless comparison, one useless conflict, one draining conversation, one emotional distraction, one more thing pulling your mind away from what actually matters. None of it looks huge on its own, but together it creates a life that feels mentally crowded. You sit down to think, but your mind is full. You try to move forward, but your energy is scattered. You want peace, but there is always something small and loud asking for your attention. That is why ignoring becomes so important. Not because everything around you disappears, but because your mind cannot build anything meaningful if it is constantly occupied by what does not deserve to stay there. Focus needs space. Clarity needs space. Healing needs space. Discipline needs space. And if every irritation, every opinion, every message, every provocation, every negative atmosphere is allowed to enter and settle inside you, then the parts of life that truly matter begin to suffocate quietly. Marcus Aurelius understood this in a very intimate way. He knew the world would always produce noise, difficult people, false judgments, ego, selfishness, chaos. None of that was going away. So the real question was never, how do I create a perfect world around me? The real question was, how do I protect the inner space where my reason, my character, and my purpose can still remain clear? That is the real work. Not controlling everything outside, but refusing to let the outside world constantly crowd the inside. Because once your inner world is crowded, you start losing contact with what matters most. You lose contact with your own goals because you are too busy processing other people's behavior. You lose contact with your own values because you are always reacting instead of choosing. You lose contact with your own peace because the mind is overstimulated, overloaded, always half busy with something unimportant. And the painful part is that many of these distractions do not even deserve the power they end up having. They only grow because they keep being fed. Epictetus would probably bring this back to one simple truth. Attention is a choice, even when it does not feel like one at first. Not every thought deserves continuation. Not every disturbance deserves emotional investment. Not every piece of noise deserves to become part of your day. The more you understand that, the more carefully you begin protecting your mind. You stop living as if everything deserves access. You stop treating every distraction like an obligation. You begin to realize that saying no inwardly is sometimes the most life-giving thing you can do. And what happens then is beautiful in a very quiet way. You start to feel space returning. Space to think before reacting. space to remember your priorities, space to work on what you keep saying matters to you, space to rest without mentally carrying 10 unnecessary things into your evening, space to hear your own deeper voice again beneath the static of the world. That is when life starts becoming simpler, not because everything is fixed, but because your attention is no longer being wasted on things that only make you smaller, weaker, and more scattered. Seneca often warned about the mind being agitated by too many useless concerns, and that warning feels very modern, maybe more than ever. There is always something asking for a reaction now, always a fresh distraction. Always another opinion, another tension, another small emotional trap. If you do not learn how to ignore deliberately, your life can become one long chain of interruptions. You may look busy, emotionally engaged, mentally active, but inside, nothing important is really being built. That is the hidden cost of noise. It does not only disturb your peace, it steals your future by stealing your focus. Because anything meaningful asks something from you. A stronger character asks for reflection. A better life asks for consistency. Healing asks for emotional room. Purpose asks for directed attention. Love asks for presence. Growth asks for repeated effort. None of these things can deepen in a mind that is always being dragged away by what is petty, loud, negative, or meaningless. So when you ignore distractions, you are not becoming detached from life. You are becoming available for a better one. You are choosing depth over noise, purpose over reaction, inner order over mental clutter. You are deciding that your mind will no longer be a public hallway where every passing disturbance gets to walk in. You are deciding that some things will be noticed but not entertained, seen but not fed, present but not allowed to dominate. And that decision changes the texture of daily life. You become calmer, yes, but also more effective, more grounded, more intentional. You waste less time emotionally circling things that do not deserve you. You recover faster from nonsense. You return more easily to your work, your values, your real direction. And slowly, almost without drama, your life begins to gather around what is essential instead of what is loud. That is the power here. When you learn to ignore the distractions, the noise, and the negativity, you do not lose anything valuable. You gain the one thing that makes every meaningful life possible, the inner space to focus on what truly matters. Number 11. The ability to remain present without becoming consumed by the world around you. There is a difference between living in the world and being swallowed by it. A lot of pain begins when that line disappears. You wake up, check one message, feel one shift in someone's tone, notice one problem, one tension, one pressure, and suddenly your whole inner state starts bending around it. Your body is here, but your mind is already somewhere else, pulled outward, absorbed, disturbed. And by the time the day is halfway gone, you're no longer really present with your own life. You are psychologically trapped inside everything that touched you. That is why presence is such a powerful form of strength. Not the shallow kind people talk about when they say, just be in the moment, as if calm can be summoned by one pretty sentence. Real presence is harder than that. Real presence means staying rooted in yourself, while life is still being life. It means feeling what is happening without becoming mentally kidnapped by it. It means noticing the noise around you without letting it invade every room inside you. It means remaining available to the moment you're in, instead of letting every outside disturbance drag you into emotional exile. This is where Stoicism becomes very alive. Marcus Aurelius did not live in a quiet world. Seneca did not write from some protected place, untouched by stress, politics, betrayal, or uncertainty. Epictetus did not speak about inner freedom because life had been gentle with him. They all understood something essential. Peace is not found by escaping reality. It is found by learning how to remain inwardly steady inside reality. That is a very different thing. Because the problem is not always what is happening around you. Often the deeper problem is how quickly the mind gets pulled away from what is right here. One comment sends you into an imagined argument. One disappointment sends you into future fear. One act of disrespect sends you into replay, analysis, inner tension. So even when nothing more is happening in the present moment, your inner life is already far away, consumed by something that has either passed or has not even happened yet. That is not presence. That is possession. And most people do not realize how often they live like this. They eat while thinking about conflict. They work while replaying conversations. They rest while carrying stress from people who are not even in the room. They sit with people they love while mentally arguing with someone else. The body remains in one place, but the mind keeps leaving. That is how life starts to feel thin, scattered, half-lived. You are technically here, but not deeply here. The Stoic path invites something stronger. It teaches you to return, again and again, not once, not perfectly, but faithfully. Return to the breath. Return to the task in front of you. Return to the values you chose. Return to what is actually happening instead of what your anxious mind keeps expanding. Seneca might say that part of wisdom is refusing to suffer more than reality requires. And that is exactly what presence protects you from. It protects you from living 3 layers beyond the actual moment. Because when you are truly present, many things lose their exaggerated power. A rude person still exists, but they do not get your whole day. A disappointment still hurts, but it does not become your identity. A problem still needs attention, but it does not become the atmosphere of your entire mind. Presence gives things their right size. It stops the mind from turning every difficulty into a total environment. It lets you respond to life without drowning in life. And that is such a beautiful kind of control, not controlling other people, not controlling outcomes, not controlling the world's timing, just controlling the doorway between what happens around you and what takes over within you. That doorway matters more than most people know. Because if everything enters unchecked, your inner life becomes crowded and unstable. But if you learn how to stay awake, to notice, to pause, to remain with yourself while the world keeps moving, then something inside you becomes much less easy to disturb. You start experiencing moments more fully. Your mind is cleaner. Your reactions slow down. Your attention stops scattering so easily. Even simple things begin to feel different. Walking, eating, working, resting, listening. Life regains texture because you are actually there for it, instead of being constantly consumed by everything outside you. And maybe that is one of the deepest powers of ignoring. It gives you your presence back. It allows you to say without words, yes, the world is noisy. Yes, people are difficult. Yes, life is imperfect. But I will not disappear into all of it. I will remain here. I will remain with myself. I will remain available for what is real, what is necessary, what is mine to live. That is not detachment in a cold sense. That is maturity. That is inner discipline. That is the quiet strength of someone who can stand in the middle of life without being emotionally carried away by every passing storm. And in a world that constantly tries to pull your mind away from the present, that kind of presence is a rare and serious power. Number 12. When you stop seeking validation from others and start focusing on your own growth, you gain a power that is unstoppable. There comes a moment in life when you begin to see how much energy has been wasted trying to be seen a certain way, trying to be appreciated enough, understood enough, admired enough, chosen enough. And maybe no one around you ever said it directly, but somewhere along the way you learned to measure yourself through response. Through praise, through approval, through how warmly people received you, how quickly they noticed your effort, how often they confirmed that you mattered. And that habit is heavy because it makes your peace depend on something that can change from one moment to the next. This is why so many people stay emotionally fragile, even while trying to become stronger. They work on themselves, but secretly hope everyone notices. They set boundaries, but still wait to be approved for having them. They grow, but keep checking whether others are impressed by that growth. They try to heal, but still look outward to confirm that they are becoming someone valuable. And the problem with living this way is not only that it is exhausting, the deeper problem is that it keeps your center outside of you. It keeps your motivation tied to reaction. It keeps your worth standing in a room full of unstable opinions. Stoicism offers a much deeper kind of power than that. Marcus Aurelius kept pulling himself back from the crowd and back toward character. Epictetus kept reminding people that freedom begins when you stop attaching your peace to what is not yours to command. Seneca warned again and again about becoming dependent on public approval because the crowd is inconsistent, emotional, distracted, and often unable to recognize what is truly good even when it is right in front of them. When you really absorb that, something begins to loosen inside you. You stop asking the world to certify your becoming, and that is when real growth starts to deepen, because growth becomes cleaner the moment it is no longer performed. You are not improving to create an image. You are improving because you are tired of abandoning yourself. You are not becoming more disciplined so people can admire your control. You are becoming more disciplined because your life feels better when it is governed from within. You are not choosing peace so others will call you mature. You are choosing peace because chaos has already cost you enough. That shift matters. It changes the whole emotional texture of self-development. It becomes less about being witnessed and more about being transformed. And that is a form of power very few people can interrupt. Because once your growth is no longer tied to applause, rejection loses much of its old force. Neglect loses some of its sting. Being misunderstood stops feeling like an identity crisis. Someone failing to appreciate you no longer becomes proof that you are on the wrong path. Why? Because your path is no longer being built through their eyes. It is being built through your own repeated commitment to becoming someone calmer, wiser, clearer, and more solid from the inside out. That is what makes this power feel unstoppable. It does not need constant encouragement to continue. It does not collapse every time someone doubts you. It does not fade when praise disappears. It does not panic when attention moves elsewhere. It keeps moving because it is rooted in something deeper than approval. It is rooted in self-respect, and self-respect changes everything quietly. It changes how you spend your time. It changes what you tolerate. It changes how quickly you return to yourself after being disturbed. It changes what kind of conversations you stop entertaining. It changes how much of your life you stop wasting trying to convince people to see your value. Because at some point, you understand that growth is slowed down every time you keep looking sideways for validation instead of looking inward for alignment. That does not mean you stop caring completely about people. It does not mean you become cold or emotionally shut down. It means you stop depending on external praise to stay loyal to your own path. You stop treating recognition as fuel. You stop confusing visibility with value. You stop building your emotional life around whether other people are clapping at the right moments. Marcus Aurelius would probably tell you that the real task is to be good, not to appear good. And there is so much freedom in that, because the second you stop curating yourself for approval, you recover an enormous amount of energy. Energy that can now go into your healing, your work, your discipline, your peace, your purpose, your daily effort to become less reactive and more grounded. That is not a small shift. That is the difference between performing a stronger life and actually building one. And once you begin living that way, people may still misunderstand you. Some may overlook you. Some may only value you when you are useful to them. Some may never fully see who you are becoming. But none of that has the same authority anymore, because your growth is no longer waiting for permission. It is no longer asking to be approved before it continues. It has become private, steady, rooted, and real. That is why this power is so difficult to stop. A person who still needs constant validation can be delayed by silence, shaken by criticism, and distracted by other people's opinions. But a person who has turned inward and committed to growth for its own sake becomes much harder to control. They do not need the room to believe in them before they act. They do not need immediate results to stay faithful. They do not need endless reassurance to continue becoming. They keep going because they have finally understood that the deepest form of success is not being validated by the world. It is becoming someone you no longer have to betray in order to be loved. And once that becomes true in your life, there is a kind of strength that begins to rise in you very quietly. Not loud strength, not performative strength, not strength that needs to announce itself. Just the kind that cannot be easily manipulated anymore, the kind that does not chase, the kind that does not beg to be seen, the kind that keeps growing whether anyone notices or not. That is unstoppable. Thank you for listening. If this episode spoke to something real inside you, take a moment to explore the channel and watch more episodes on Stoicism, inner peace, self-control, and mental strength. And if you want to keep walking this path with me, subscribe and stay close. There is much more here for you.